Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Isaacson. I'm a clinical psychologist and professor at the Division of Community Behavioral Health in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of New Mexico. And I'm part of the Technical Assistance Center team for the Senate Bill 3 in New Mexico. And I'm going to provide a brief description of the New Mexico Youth Enhanced Sequential Intercept Model in preparation for community system mapping sessions coming up in the next few months. I encourage you to first watch the video by James Fairfax Colombo that provides a full overview of the sequential intercept model. This today is just to describe some components of the youth enhanced sequential intercept model developed in New Mexico. And this is a chance for you to think about what services are available in your community or what could be. And so this is a flow chart for the New Mexico enhanced sequential intercept model. As you can see, there's a youth side and an adult side, and we are doing that because the two systems are quite different. And so I will be focusing in the middle section, the pre-intercept and the intercept 0 for the youth side of it. And in New Mexico, we decided to do an enhanced sequential intercept model and add the pre-intercept, which is community prevention services. This is in recognition that not all individuals with mental illness or substance abuse disorders encounter the justice system. Therefore, when mapping services within the community, it's important to assess the availability and gaps in community prevention services that aim to support all individuals who may never come in contact with the justice system. And as I mentioned, we're adding a component for the youth system so we can understand the availability and gaps in the youth system, which is quite different than the adult system. And so with the enhanced sequential intercept model, we're adding components to focus on prevention and early intervention. I'm using a public health framework that focuses on improving the health and well-being of all New Mexicans with the goal of preventing initial involvement or deeper penetration into the healthcare or justice systems. And many of the programs we're going to be talking about today are overseen by the New Mexico Children, Youth, Families Department, but there are other agencies in the state that oversee some of these programs, such as the Behavioral Health Services Division, the Department of Health and Courts also. But there are also many programs across the state that are supported through non-state funds. They could be tribal, nonprofit, or other community-based organizations that provide some of these services. Some of these services may apply to multiple intercepts, and not all communities have all these services or have the need for all of them, but we're going to talk about them today. So first, we're going to start talking about the pre-intercept. So this is community prevention. These are universal community-based health promotion and prevention services. So it involves proactive initiatives designed to address the root causes of social problems like substance misuse, crime, and mental health challenges within a community, ideally before they escalate to require more intensive interventions, such as contact with the justice or healthcare systems. The goal of these programs is to strengthen protective factors and sense of belonging while reducing risk factors that contribute to negative outcomes. So these are programs that are available to all youth and families, ideally before a crisis or involvement in the justice system. And I'll show you some examples here. This is a list of points of interest in this pre-intercept. As you can see, there's a long list here of different youth serving organizations. It could be churches, schools, community-based programs, healthcare programs that can help a youth and family to stay in their community, to get the help they need if there's mental illness or substance use disorders before involvement in the justice system. And so what I do want to highlight here is the importance of primary care, because that's often the first time that a youth may be identified as having a need in these areas. And so primary care providers can do screening and brief intervention to families and connect them to resources in the community. It's important that these programs are available in communities to youth so that they can access them and have meaningful activities and programs that benefit them and their families, and identify challenges early on before involvement in the healthcare or justice system. So the next intercept is intercept 0. This is community treatment, schools, and crisis services. So this is when there may be involvement, there may be a crisis, there may be contact with the police or justice system, and this can be some early intervention. So this involves school systems and related student support systems, such as school-based health centers that can provide connection to services rather than promoting exclusionary discipline or arrest. It also involves community and school-based programs for mental and behavioral health that focus on prevention and early intervention to avoid crises and reduce risk for justice involvement. So the goal of these programs is to connect youth with treatment, services, or other supports prior to any system involvement or exclusionary discipline within the schools. And so this is important to think about as a system of care. What services are available, ideally starting with schools for youth and services that are available. And we'll go over these next. So here's points of interest for Intercept Zero. As you can see, it's a long list and we have more on the next slide. But these are services such as youth crisis services, like mobile response and stabilization service, or MRSS. And this is a child, youth, and family specific behavioral health crisis intervention and stabilization service that includes in-person response, screening, and triage to de-escalate the crisis as defined by the child, youth, family, or caregivers. It provides ongoing stabilization services and follow-up and navigation across the system in the community to prevent future crises or out-of-home placement. So it's available, ideally, it's available to all children in New Mexico, including those in state custody. And I will also wanted to highlight the local CASA, the court-appointed special advocates program. And this is really important for youth who are first involved in the criminal justice system. They can have, these are volunteers that can be instrumental in assuring that a child or family receives services which the court has ordered, like substance abuse counseling or special education testing. And so these volunteers help the youth and family to make sure that the youth remains safe in the system. They may be the only consistent point of contact as the youth moves through the labyrinth of the child welfare system and juvenile justice system. And so it's important to have that point of contact who understands the system and who will follow the youth through the program and help connect them to different services. There may be court advocacy, mentoring, access for visitation, behavioral health services, and things like that. Another very important programs are youth and family peer support. So these are family peer support is a parent or primary caregiver who has the lived experience of raising a child that experienced emotional, behavioral, and mental health or substance abuse challenges that require them to navigate the child serving system on behalf of their own child. So these are parents or caregivers who are trained based on their experience to help families navigate the system. And it's similar for the youth peer support. This is for, these are young adults who have had to navigate the system themselves and can help other youth navigate the behavioral health system. Also want to highlight multi-systemic therapy. This is an evidence-based intensive home and family and community-focused treatment for youth with serious externalizing antisocial or delinquent behavior. The goal is to keep youth who have exhibited these problems at home, in their schools, and engage in pro-social activities. And it's delivered by a therapist who leads a small team to keep the youth in their homes, in their communities, and they provide 24/7 coverage. And this is available in certain parts of New Mexico, but this could be something that the community could look into adding. Another important program is high fidelity wraparound. This is a service that is billable through Medicaid. And these are teams from community behavioral health centers that work with youth to provide some care coordination and support to help the youth and family identify needs and supports that help them to thrive in their communities. And we have a limited number of residential treatment centers. Some are state-run and some are private. But those are often in certain communities, but are accessible for youth throughout the state. And next, I want to focus more on other services in this Intercept Zero. So this can include inpatient psychiatric centers that serve youth, substance abuse treatment, inpatient or outpatient, detoxification treatment centers, school health centers, where they can do assessments and provide services. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I also want to point out some of the, so it's important for care coordination. The managed care organizations provide care coordination, or through the CareLink program in youth with Medicaid can have this this care coordination to help them access services that they need. And also there's policy groups in the state, the regional and state level that gather stakeholders that seek to prevent delinquency, improve the juvenile justice system, and increase coordination across stakeholders. And so these are stakeholder policy groups that communities could tap into as well. And the schools, as I mentioned, is a really important part of Intercept Zero. This is where a lot of times the challenges are identified. There could be a crisis or there could be delinquent behavior. And the goal is to have school systems set up to support the youth to get the services they need, either in schools or connect them to community resources and have alternative supports to keep them in their homes, keep them in their schools, in their communities, and prevent crises and further penetration into the juvenile justice system or the healthcare system. And you can see a list of types of services here that are often seen in schools. And so of these the pre-intercept and intercept zero, this is an important layer of the sequential intercept model to identify youth early who are in need of services, prevent further crises, and further penetration into the juvenile justice system. So I encourage you to consider these as you map out what's in your community or what services could be in your community. And I thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Jen Perillo, and I'm an associate professor in the Division of Community Behavioral Health in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of New Mexico, and another member of the Technical Assistance Center along with Dr. Brian Isaacson. Before we get into the next part of this presentation, I would first like to thank Corey Adams, Director of Juvenile Justice System Field Services within New Mexico, for providing permission for use of some of the slides you're about to see. The slides are from a recent Juvenile Justice Summit held in Santa Fe County. All of the slides with CYFD at the bottom are from their presentation. I would also like to thank Children's Court Attorney Rachel Nilsson, who provided permission for allowing us to use a recording of her presentation at the same summit. This presentation was edited for length. So the next intercept that we have in the youth sequential intercept model that for New Mexico, the ESIM, is in intercept 1, initial contact with CYFD, law enforcement, or school police officers, or school resource officers, or SROs. This also includes municipal police departments, sheriff's departments, and children, youth, and families departments who have the discretion to decide whether a case continues into the juvenile justice system or not. The goal of these programs is to divert youth into treatment instead of being referred into the juvenile justice system. Diversion offers youth and their families individualized supports based on their needs and provides the opportunity to change youth trajectories. Diversion reduces future delinquency as a result, avoids labeling juveniles as delinquent, which can have a self-fulfilling prophecy, promotes public safety, and reduces costs for communities. As a sort of a preface here, there are two major categories of offenses that can bring a youth into contact with the juvenile justice system services, a delinquent offense and a status offense. Delinquent offenses are any delinquent act committed by youth under the age of 18, and you can see some examples here on this slide. Battery, criminal damage to property, possession of marijuana in a school zone, and so on. Juvenile probation can also handle traffic offenses such as DUIs, unlawful taking of a motor vehicle, reckless driving, and more. Conversely, there's the other category are status offenses. So these are categories of offenses that are not chargeable or subject to detention, except if we are dealing with out-of-state runaway. So New Mexico, children that run away from home, those who are deemed incorrigible or a family in need of services or attendance referrals for excessive absences or tardies, are considered status offenses and therefore would not be charged formally within the juvenile justice system. And so there are three main ways that juveniles enter the juvenile justice system in terms of referrals. First is that incorrigible or family need of services referrals, and these can be made by a number of different types of individuals: parents, schools, law enforcement, protective services, counseling agencies, other behavioral health workers. The truancy referrals are going to be made directly by schools. And then there are law enforcement referrals, which could be either those delinquent or status referrals. For law enforcement referrals, there are forwarded to the juvenile probation office And the juvenile probation officer will decide whether or not that individual meets criteria for detention. If the alleged charges are forwarded to the juvenile probation office, the case is assigned to a juvenile probation officer, and they will meet with the client and their family to conduct a preliminary inquiry within 30 days. If they do not meet detention criteria, these cases can be sometimes fast-tracked, in which case they have to do that preliminary inquiry within 72 hours. If the child does meet criteria for detention, they either have to be released within 24 hours of being detained, or a petition has to be filed and they will go before a judge within 48 hours to determine whether or not that detention will continue, or whether conditions for release will be set. So within this first intercept, you'll see that there are several points of interest that can be important for the youth sequential intercept model. So the first is school police officers, school resource officers, and the pathways into exclusionary discipline that may exist within the school system. And exclusionary discipline can be in school or out of school suspensions, expulsions, other types of discipline that can remove a child from being within the school system. Also interested in the types of referrals that are coming into the Children, Youth, and Families Department to the Juvenile Justice Division, and what sort of referrals those might be. Dispatch and 911, how they handle youth-related calls, and law enforcement agencies, how they have been trained to deal with youth, especially youth in crisis. Within the second intercept is the juvenile justice intake and initial processing. So this involves initial case processing by juvenile probation within CYFD, so that preliminary inquiry process that we previously mentioned. And the youth can be detained at this intercept. So after conducting that preliminary inquiry, juvenile probation may handle cases informally outside of the court system, such as through diversion or other community-based programs, or formally through referring the case to the children's court attorney. By statute, some youth shall be referred directly to the children's court attorney by juvenile probation, and they can choose to refer other youth to the children's court attorney as well. Children's court attorneys can dismiss charges, divert youth into community-based programs, or refer youth back to Children, Youth, Families Department with informal recommendations for services. And the goal of programs at this intercept is to divert youth into community-based programs rather than going further into the juvenile justice process. So in terms of the preliminary inquiry that's conducted by the juvenile probation officers, they complete that preliminary inquiry with the client and family. The family may also have an attorney if they wish, within 30 working days of being assigned the case. If that particular case is being fast-tracked, the preliminary inquiry is completed within 72 hours. If the youth is being detained, the preliminary inquiry is completed again within that 24 hours of detainment. They also look at clinical recommendations, and the juvenile probation officer will look at other types of records to see what other information they may have about this particular juvenile, such as other detainments, adjudications, other health records, etc. The juvenile probation officer and supervisor will then make a decision about whether this particular case will be handled informally or whether it will be formally referred to the children's court attorney. All felony charges do get submitted to the children's court attorney, as well as any youth who have more than 3 misdemeanor referrals within 2 years. When a case is being handled informally, there are 3 types of informal actions that can be taken. One is no further action. So this does not mean that no action was taken, but simply that no additional action beyond what has already happened needs to occur through juvenile justice services. So for example, if a child has already entered into some sort of treatment or counseling, then CYFD would determine, or the probation office would determine, no further action was needed on their part. Juvenile probation can also set informal conditions, and this can include monitoring for up to 3 months. And this can involve a number of different types of conditions. or they can be assessed and referred. And this is referrals made to different types of community resources, such as community-based treatment programs. One example being, for example, teen court or uplift youth, different types of diversion programs. If a youth does fail to comply with informal services or requirements on a delinquent case, the juvenile probation officer may forward that case to the children's court attorney. When making decisions about detention, the juvenile probation officer will complete a risk assessment instrument, or RAI, and this tool determines whether the youth meets criteria for detention. So first off, they have to have committed a delinquency act as opposed to a status offense, and they have to have posed a substantial risk of harm to themselves or others, or demonstrated that they are at risk of leaving the jurisdiction of the court. When juvenile probation forwards a case to the children's court attorney, they can make recommendations for what they think maybe should happen with that youth. So they can request, for example, a time waiver, consent decrees, 1 to 2 years judgment or disposition. So essentially, how much time that youth will be monitored within the system. Can also go up to the age of 21 if they are being adjudicated as a youthful offender. And also youth can be committed to a secure facility for either 1 year, 2 years, or up to the age of 21, again, if they are being adjudicated as a youthful offender. And to be adjudicated as a youthful offender within New Mexico, the youth has to be within a certain age range, as well as have committed specific offenses that are listed in statute. And now we'll turn to Rachel Nilsson from the First Judicial District Attorney's Office, who will provide a perspective as a children's court attorney.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Nilsson and I am the Children's Court Attorney for the First Judicial District Attorney's Office. I just want to take today to go over the process of a juvenile case, going through my office and basically what we're looking for when it comes to screening, diverting, or prosecuting cases. We try to use these psychological assessments you heard JPO talk about. These are performed by professionals and they give us pretty much a holistic view of the child. What are the past traumas? Where are the issues? How are they doing in school? What does their family structure look like? And if they have any issues, how can we address that and make sure it doesn't follow them into adulthood? With juvenile justice, we are looking at the entire situation. What resources do they need? What are the issues? What does their familial structure look like? And that's going to inform our resolutions going forward. And using all of this and looking at this, we do like to utilize community engagement. Like I said, a lot of times it's a resource issue. So we're going to use our community and all the resources available to us to wrap the child around with services in order to guide them in a better and safer direction. So this is the process of a case that is filed. It takes a while for juvenile cases to get filed. And this is because of the time limits that we are working underneath. So if a child is held in detention, we have 30 days to reach a resolution. If they're not held in detention, then we have 120 days. This means that we lean heavily on our law enforcement agency partners to complete their investigation before handing it over to JPO, before handing it over to us. Because frankly, once we file, we're off to the races. We don't have time to deep dive and investigate cases. And furthermore, we have to meet the same legal standards for a juvenile case as we would an adult case. So we still have to meet the legal standard of sufficiency of probable cause and potentially beyond a reasonable doubt when going into this. So here you see that the incident occurs and the law enforcement investigates. They can consult with us on charges, either by calling me during working hours, or if it's on the weekend, or not, calling the DA that's on call. After that, it is given to the JPPO for review, and JPPO is going to decide using that RAI metric whether or not to hold the child in detention. From there, they conduct their preliminary inquiry, And then they're going to refer the charges to me. I'm going to get that PID that includes the chronological history of past offenses, and I'm going to look at that and the police reports and all of the evidence and decide if we should file, if we should not file, and also whether the charges are correct or need to be amended in any way. So I'm going to ask myself several questions when I do get this, and I have 60 days to look at the case before filing. And I'm going to ask myself multiple questions, including, can we meet the legal standard for this charge? Is there enough legal sufficiency for me to bring this forward and prosecute the case? Is the evidence in? Are we missing evidence? Do we need to find the evidence before I make a final decision? And then we're also going to ask, can this be handled by diversion? We're going to go over diversion in a little bit, but sometimes it's a resource issue or it doesn't rise to the level of needing prosecution. I'm going to ask myself, what is the case history? Is this the first time I'm seeing this kid, or is it the fifth? And finally, I'm going to ask myself, should we file this case? Is there something else that can be done before we take them through the juvenile justice process? And then we're going to, if we decide to file, we are going to have a court date set.
So within Intercept 2, some points of interest include, again, that juvenile probation, how they're screening those individuals. So when they do conduct that preliminary inquiry process and when they're setting informal conditions for youth, if they're going to go through that process, they do go through conduct several screenings with the youth to determine what those needs might be. And looking at what types of community programs they may be connecting youth with in terms of those informal sanctions as well. So again, some examples here: victim offender mediation, different types of diversion programs, community service, clinical interventions, restorative justice counseling, or mentoring programs. As we mentioned before, youth can be screened at risk of harm for themselves, others, or for fleeing the jurisdiction and therefore detained. At this particular intercept, there would then be alternatives to detention that might exist within a community where youth can be sent as opposed to be placed into a detention facility. And just simply interested in how cases are being held within a particular community in terms of the number of cases are being handled formally, informally, or being referred to the children's court attorney. With the children's court attorney, additional points of interest include the choices that they are making in terms of release and diversion options, referrals to specialty courts where they exist, as well as that initial hearing process and the setting of conditions, as well as sending cases back. So the children's court attorney can decline to file charges or send cases back to juvenile justice services within CYFD with informal recommendations for services. The third intercept involves case processing in children's court, which can result in juvenile commitment or community-based placements or referrals. Juveniles may be detained prior to case adjudication or placed in alternative community-based settings. So the court also has discretion to invoke either an adult sentence or juvenile sanctions on those adjudicated as youthful offenders. The court may also divert juveniles, mandate treatment, or otherwise consider juveniles' mental health needs when imposing sanctions. And the goal of programs at this intercept is to divert youth from detention and commitment. Now we'll return to Rachel Nilsson to discuss the children's court process in greater detail.
So once a case is filed, we're going to have a first appearance hearing, and there's going to be several parties at that hearing. Most of the time, they are virtual. It's going to be the child and their parents or guardians. I'm going to be there, the defense attorney most of the time, the law office of the public defender, the JPO, and the judge will be there. The charges will be read to make sure the child understands what they're being charged with. The potential penalties are going to be read. And then most likely they'll enter in a denial, which is like pleading not guilty, and it reserves their right. From there, we are going to get an update from JPO. They kind of give a background of information to the court, to me, and we set conditions of release. which can include everything from GPS house arrest, random drug tests, attending school or another educational program with no unexcused absences or tardies, abiding by a curfew as set by the parents, no contact with the alleged victims or co-defendants, and completing an assessment. Almost all of these kids will complete some sort of assessment, and we're gonna use that assessment to decide where the problem areas are, where the issues are moving forward. Like I said, we use the assessments. These are often done through team builders. It takes a few weeks, but it also informs our decisions moving forward, and it also plays a direct role in the negotiations. Before I start negotiations, I a lot of times like to email or contact their JPO officer, ask how they have a feel for the kid, what's going to work, what's going to not work. They have had the direct interactions with the kid and with their family, and so they are better equipped to give me an idea of what's going on. They also tell me how the kid's been doing on conditions of release. Have they been struggling? Have they been not? This kind of gives me a whole holistic view of what's going to work best in the plea negotiations. We try to come up with a plea deal that is going to make sure to rehabilitate the child and make sure that we don't see them again, at least come across our desk. I really enjoy children's court. It's not as acrimonious as adult court. The fact that most defense attorneys are also working in the best interest of the child to rehabilitate the child. So most of the time we can come up with some sort of plea hearing or plea agreement, whether that be probation, a consent decree, or even a commitment. We have sent kids to residential treatment centers to get help with substance abuse. But we try to work together to find out what's best for the child. So most cases end up in an adjudicatory hearing where an agreement is proposed and we reach that final disposition. From there, if they successfully complete all of their program, their treatment, whatever is ordered, we can close out the case. However, if they're struggling or they violate or they pick up new charges, we can revoke their probation and extend the disposition. This can be extended all the way up until they're 21. One thing that is different, that there's no distinction between misdemeanor crimes and felony crimes for juvenile cases. So all cases have the same maximum penalty and the same, which is up to 2 years of YDDC that can be extended up to 21 until the age of 21.
Within New Mexico, there's a number of different facilities that are available. So there are detention centers in some counties across New Mexico. There are also 2 youth reintegration centers that are staffed by CYFD, as well as 2 correctional facilities within New Mexico.
So we have talked about how we have very little beds for our judicial district, but here are just a few things that we are looking at, which included that they have committed a delinquent act, so not a status crime. Status crimes include incorrigible or skipping school. This has to be a delinquent act. They need to be older than 12 years, a substantial risk, a danger to themselves, or leave the jurisdiction, or a danger to others. A lot of times they were already on conditions of release and have violated in some way. This is a placeholder to hold them until we figure out where the best place is for them to go. We don't like to hold them and keep them there until a resolution, but if they are an articulable risk to themselves or the community, we will hold them until we reach a resolution. However, most of the time, we hold them in detention. We figure out where is a safe place for them to go. Is their parents equipped to handle them right now? These are all questions that we have to ask ourselves.
In terms of Intercept 3 points of interest, there's the children's court in terms of the specialty training that children's court judges may receive, how often youth are being placed in alternative settings as opposed to correctional facilities, what sort of release conditions are being imposed at that initial hearing process, diversion programs that are being used, etc. At this particular Intercept is also an interest in how many cases are being adjudicated as either youthful offenders or serious youthful offenders. Serious youthful offender cases are when youth have been accused of first-degree murder and are being found guilty of that particular offense. There are a few specialty courts available for youth. And so also looking at whether or not those exist in a particular community and how youth are connected to those specialty courts, as well as those juvenile detention alternatives and the detention and correctional facilities that are used within a particular community, and how that impacts families within that community. So, for example, if there is no facility within a particular community, what sort of supports may exist to connect family to being able to see their children if they are detained in a facility. Intercept 4 is community reentry services. So for juveniles that were placed in a correctional facility, this is supported reentry back into the community. And the goal of programs at this intercept is to link youth and individuals who've come of age to various services, including behavioral mental health services, to reduce further legal system involvement. So there are a number of different points of interest, again, at this intercept. One is juvenile probation or supervised release. And so this is going to be, setting of conditions for those individuals as they transfer out of those correctional facilities. And for particular youth that are considered at higher risk, they may also qualify for juvenile justice transition services. So it's simply a higher level of care there. And so there includes various types of discharge planning, connection to medication and aftercare, so transition continuity of services there, other linkages to treatment and services as needed, integrating with the family and education, housing, as well as other types of screening that can happen for behavioral and mental health needs. There's also juvenile reintegration centers, so that juveniles can be sent to. So Intercept 5 is juvenile community corrections, which involves mandated youth supervision and connection to services by juvenile probation and juvenile community corrections to reduce and further justice involvement of youth. And so the goal of programs at this intercept is to provide individualized supports for youth to prevent violations or offenses that may extend connection to the juvenile correctional system. For formal supervision of youth by juvenile probation. And so not all youth obviously are going to be put into a correctional facility, but could be still subject to different types of formal monitoring by juvenile probation. And so if they are under formal supervision, they'll complete a statewide standardized probation agreement that has been created by Juvenile Justice Services. And that can include special conditions that are imposed on an individual youth based on their needs. They will assess youth and their family for needs and risks to determine what level of supervision is necessary and what types of intervention services might be needed to decrease the risk factors for that youth and family. And they use a structured decision-making tool to determine what those needs and strengths are, to develop a plan of care that will be developed to identify the actions and goals for that youth. And those are reassessed regularly until the youth is released from formal supervision. The state funds a number of programs at all of the different intercept levels for juvenile justice services. The first two on this page are from earlier intercepts, but the Juvenile Community Corrections Program falls within this intercept, where all adjudicated youth ages 10 to 21 that are on probation or are at risk of having their probation revoked can qualify for services, as well as post-adjudicated youth transitioning from probation or supervised release into the community can receive services and case management and education, for example, life skills, coaching, etc. So within this intercept, again, points of interest include juvenile probation and how they're connecting juveniles to services, the types of screenings and assessments that are being done, and what sort of partnerships exist in terms of services being provided within the community. And similarly with juvenile community corrections, the types of supports that are being provided to youth, for example, housing and different types of housing, peer support networks and programs, as well as being connected to various types of groups, including faith-based groups, and programs like life skills, again, vocational programs, as well as services for parents under both of these programs. And so hopefully this video provides just a brief overview of the youth system within New Mexico, as well as some of the elements that your community can be considering in terms of what services you have and what services you may want to explore to expand the offerings within your own community. Thank you very much.